Graphing tangent and cotangent. Remember that the first thing you should know is that the tangent parent function has asymptotes at negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. The cotangent has asymptotes at 0 and pi. Now we know there are more asymptotes than that, but we really need to remember those so that we can find out where the new asymptotes are after the transformations. Remember that the transformations that cause the asymptotes to change are the horizontal asymptotes. So if I'm looking at this function right here, it's going to be this part right here that's going to change the asymptote. For this function, it's going to be this part that's going to change the asymptote. So what we end up doing is we end up setting the horizontal part equal to the parent asymptotes and that answer, x equals whatever, is going to give us our new asymptote. So let's look at an example. We start with a simple example. I'm going to draw an x and a y axis. First thing I'm going to do is realize that the horizontal part that I'm talking about right here is right here, the 1/2 x. So I'm going to take the 1/2 x and I'm going to set it equal to negative pi over 2 because I know that's one of the asymptotes. Then to get rid of a 1/2, I'm going to multiply by 2 on each side. And so I get x equals negative 2 pi over 2, which equals negative pi. So that's where my asymptote is going to be. Here at negative pi, I'm going to draw an asymptote. Now the next thing I want to figure out is my period. So remember, for tangent or cotangent, you find the period by doing pi divided by b. And in this case, pi divided by 1/2, because 1/2 is b. So again, I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, so pi over 1 times 2 over 1 equals 2 pi. So now if I added 2 pi to this, I would get to 0, and then I would get over here to pi. So this is my next asymptote. And if I wanted to go to another asymptote, I would have to add 2 more pi to this, so I would end up being over here at 3 pi. So your period tells you have to use one of the parent asymptotes to find the initial asymptote. Then after you find that one, you can find the others by using your period. So the next thing we're going to do is realize that in between these two, we're going to be right at the x-axis. And then tangent, remember, it always goes from low to high. So I look at my amplitude, and remember, it's not really an amplitude for tangent, but it's this number out here in front, which would be a 1. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 1 here and a negative 1 here. So since it's low to high, I'm going to go down first. So I'm going to go down here to negative 1. On this side, I'm going to go up to positive 1, and I'm just doing it halfway between these two lines. And then I just connect it. And there's one cycle. Then I do the same thing here, halfway between these two, I go down to negative 1. Halfway between these two, I go up to positive 1. And then I just draw my graph. So realize that tangent and cotangent are not the same as we do with sine and cosine. We got to remember that the period formula is different, but we also have to remember that we have to find that asymptote. So let's try another. This one definitely has more involved here. So I'm going to start by making my x and y axis. And the first thing that I'm going to notice here is that this is my horizontal part. Okay, so my horizontal part is right here. So I'm going to start by taking x minus pi over 4, and I'm going to set it equal to one of the asymptotes for cotangent. So I like 0. So I'm going to get x equals pi over 4. So I know that's an asymptote. So I'm going to put pi over 4, and I'm going to make that an asymptote. Then I want to find my period. Well, since it's just 1 here in front, I'm going to have period is pi over b, which in this case is 1. So pi over 1, so my period is just pi. So I'm going to add pi over 4 plus pi, which of course this will be 4 pi over 4, so it's going to be 5 pi over 4. So my next asymptote is at 5 pi over 4. And if I wanted to go that way, I could take pi over 4 minus pi. And again, we know this is 4 pi over 4. So if I do pi over 4 minus 4 pi over 4, I know my other asymptote is going to be here at 3 pi over 4. So your period is important, but your period is a little bit easier in tangent because the period is what's between them. You don't have to divide by 4 to figure out what it is. Now this one also has a vertical here, vertical down 2. So I'm going to go down to negative 2. And as we've done before, I'm going to draw myself a reference line. So now I'm going to change colors. So I'm going to make blue the actual graph. So halfway in between these two asymptotes on the reference line is where my 0 is. So halfway between these two on the reference line. Then I look at it, it's 1. So I'm going to end up going 1 above it and 1 below it. So I'm going to end up going 1 this way. Then I also have to notice that it's a reflection. So usually cotangent would go from high to low, but since I'm reflecting it, it's going to go from low to high. So I'm going to go this side, 1 down, this side, 1 up, and draw my graph. And then the same thing on this side. I'm going to go 1 below, 1 up, and then draw my graph. So what you have to remember is whatever is here for the horizontal asymptote, that is the part of what you're going to set equal to one of the asymptotes. Once you've got one asymptote, to get the next asymptote, just add the period on. And then you add the period each time. If I'm asking for 2 cycles, then you're going to have to add 2 more asymptotes. And if you have the vertical, remember that the vertical is always going to give you that reference line. And that reference line is always going to be where you start in between these 2 asymptotes. And then remember, cotangent goes high to low, but because this one reflected, we went low to high. So you have to memorize that. You have to know high to low for cotangent, low to high for tangent. And you also have to make sure that you remember these asymptotes. Tangent, remember, is multiples, odd multiples of pi over 2, and cotangent is multiples of pi.